All right, guys. First of all, I wanted to remind everybody of a couple things. There's a study session this afternoon, Friday, from 3:10 to 3:55 up here in my room. On tomorrow, on Saturday, make sure you report to the business building at UAH by 8 a.m. Today, during the time that I'm not there, I'm going to review you a little bit on energy to help you get ready for the study session on some things I think you're probably weak on. And also we're going to talk about vertebrates. The questions on the worksheet that the sub has given you, those are due on Monday for people in A classes, and they're due on Tuesday for people in B classes. I want to talk a little bit about these definitions of energy. Free energy is energy that's available to help you do work in your body. Reactions are exergonic if they release energy, and they're endergonic if they have to take in energy to make them happen. Most of your body's endergonic reactions get that energy from either ATP or GTP. So the hydrolysis of ATP or the hydrolysis of GTP, those reactions are exergonic. And reactions like the contraction of muscles, the pumping of protons during photosynthesis, those reactions take energy. They're endergonic. And you can see that in these two diagrams, how that the reactions that are endergonic require energy to be added, and the reactions that are exergonic are actually giving off energy and losing it. Oftentimes we talk about free energy by giving it a symbol delta G, Gibbs free energy constant. In reactions that are exergonic, that delta G number is always going to be a negative number. It's going to be less than 0. That negative means the energy is being released, given off. Reactions that are endergonic have a positive G value, and that means that they're giving off energy. G has to be a positive number for reactions that are endergonic. Here we can kind of see some examples. Reactions that are exergonic tend to be spontaneous. They happen on their own because they don't need any energy added to make them happen. Their delta G value is less than 0. It's a negative number. Reactions that are endergonic are non-spontaneous. To make them happen, you have to add activation energy. Their delta G value has to be positive. All right, last time we talked about a little bit about phylum Chordata. This is the group of the vertebrates, but there's a couple of kinds of organisms in this group that aren't really vertebrates. These two things, lancets and tunicates. First thing we're going to talk about today is what makes a vertebrate be a vertebrate and what makes a chordate be a chordate. Because all these things you see up here are chordates, but only these guys, the clear ones here, are vertebrates. All right, these are the characteristics that make things be in this phylum Chordata. At some point in their life, all chordates have a what's called a notochord, which is this rod. It's on the dorsal side. And what does dorsal mean? The back. So they've got this rod along their back. It's a support rod. In most of the vertebrates, most of the animals in this group, that becomes part of the spinal, not the spinal cord, but the vertebral column, the backbone. During the life cycle, at some point in time or other, all chordates have gill slits in their neck, like a fish, like a shark. Also, at some point in time during their life cycle, all chordates have a tail. You've had a tail at some point in time, believe it or not. Also, all chordates have bilateral symmetry, two sides that are mirror images of each other. And all the chordates are deuterostomes, which means that during embryonic development, the blastopore in the gastrula, that initial ball of cells, becomes what? The anus. Mouth forms second. Anus forms first. So we're going to back up and talk about these first two organisms. We're going to talk about a group called Cephalochordata to begin with. Cephalochordata. Yeah. Yep. In this group, Cephalochordata is a little animal called a lancet. And I'll show you a picture of him in a minute. He looks like a fish without a head, pretty much. What makes him a chordate is he has all those characteristics that we just saw. He's got a notochord, gill slits, he's deuterostome, he's got bilateral symmetry, all those things that we just went through. But he doesn't have a backbone like you. He's obviously an animal. He looks like I said, he looks like a fish without a head. He's a filter feeder, lives in shallow ocean waters, marine waters. And most of the time, he actually basically sticks his back end down in the sand and his head sticks up just above the sand level in the bottom of the water, filter feeding, sort of like a sponge. And he uses his gill slits for actually catching food. So those are kind of like pores, like in a sponge, you know, they have all those pores they pull in the water. That's what the gill slits are for in this lancet. Notice here too that he has a ventral blood vessel. His blood is colorless, clear blood, no heart. But it's thought to have, vertebrates are thought to have evolved from something very similar to this lancet thing. Here's what one looks like. So it sort of looks like it almost looks like a tadpole. No backbone. It's got this notochord in the back. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but there's a stiff rod here in his back. You can see the gill slits right in here. But there's no real head, no true head. There's another animal called the tunicate. And this thing, it really looks more like a sponge than it does a vertebrate. But it's a chordate because, again, it has all those things at some point in his life cycle. It has a notochord, gill slits, it's deuterostome, bilateral symmetry, all those things we talked about before. It has them. Turns out most of those things it has only during its larva stage. So as an adult, it does look more like a sponge than it does a vertebrate. As it says here, its larva looks a little bit like a tadpole. It's got a nerve cord running down its back, a lot like our nerve cord, a lot like our spinal cord. It's got a primitive brain-like structure with an eye spot. It's also got an otolith, or otolith. What does oto usually mean? O-T-O. Ear. Your ear has a structure in it other than hearing that helps you to do what? Balance. This is something similar. It helps them to orient to gravity, sort of an equilibrium kind of organ. They have the notochord, which, again, in vertebrates, true vertebrates, becomes part of your vertebral column. Notice these tadpole-like larvae mature in just a few hours. So they go from being a larva to an adult very, very quickly. And when they become an adult, they attach themselves to something hard like a rock, and they look like that. So they look sort of like a sponge as an adult. They filter feed, just like a sponge would. And that's pretty much all we're going to say about those guys. Those guys are chordates because they have all these particular characteristics at some point in time in their life, but they're not vertebrates. The vertebrates, what are the first true vertebrates? What are the lowest vertebrates on the chain in the phylogenetic tree? What vertebrate supposedly came first? Fish. Whether we're looking at animals or plants, when you're looking at evolution, where did life supposedly start? In the water, and it moved out from there. It's the whole theory of evolution. Whether we're talking about plant evolution or animal evolution, that's the typical way it goes. So we'll talk about the actual true vertebrates now. We talked about this group last time, class Myxinea. These are the jawless fish. They do have a structure, a hard backbone, vertebrates do, that protects their spinal cord, the nerve cord. These are characteristics of, in general, of vertebrates. Large and active, a lot of sense organs in their head, cephalization, a nice axial skeleton that runs up and down their body. And this axial skeleton will grow with the organism, usually with two pairs of appendages, arms and legs. They have disc in between their vertebrae to pad it, keep those bones from rubbing on each other. A really good respiratory system. which gives them a lot of oxygen and a lot of energy, a lot of ATP. Same with the circulatory system. A really good digestive system, which lets them eat a lot of stuff and digest it and absorb it really well. And then a good brain, an advanced nervous system. And there's our phylogenetic tree. Notice over here, here are our lancets and our tunicates. And then here are our true vertebrates, the agnathans, the jawless fish, the cartilaginous fish, the bony fish, and then we got amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. And these things in white that you see on here, these are adaptations that allow these animals to be better adapted for what? Life on land. When we talk about plants, we'll do a similar thing. How did they adapt? How did they evolve to become better and better at living on the land? All right, these we're not going to spend too much time on because we've already talked about them once. The jawless fish were thought to be the first fish to evolve. Sometimes they're called agnathans, which means no jaws. There's the hagfish, which we saw in the last slide. There's another kind of jawless fish called the lamprey. This one's more of a parasite. And a lamprey looks like this. So it will attach on to host with that sucker-like mouth, and it'll bite into it and basically feed on that host organism. Feed on its blood and its organs. All right, we're going to talk now about a little bit more complicated fish, the gnathostomes, which means they have jaws. They have a jawed mouth, is literally what that means. The first group of organisms to have jaws, at least the first group of vertebrates to have jaws, were the class Chondrichthyes. These are the cartilage fish. These are like sharks, stingrays, manta rays, those kinds of things. The only bones they have in their body are their teeth. Skeleton's cartilage. The advantage of having cartilage is that it's light. They can move fast. And they're living in the water. Anything that lives in the water, what's an advantage in terms of weight? What does the water do to your weight? It supports your weight, right? If you get a whale out of the water, what happens to the whale? Its weight crushes it. It can breathe air just like you can. But its weight is too much. And its skeleton's not made to support that much weight because its skeleton is made to work in conjunction with what? Water, helping to support the weight. Same with these guys. The cartilaginous fish have that really scaly skin, almost like tooth skin, that helps to keep the salt water from pulling the water out of them and desiccating them. Really powerful jaws, good vision, good smell or olfaction. And they've got this line that runs down the middle of their body that helps them to pick up vibrations and sounds. Also remember that their cloaca, which is a pouch at the end of their intestines, is both the opening for waste and the opening to the reproductive system, which is kind of gross. There's a shark. You see his gill slits, dorsal fin. Osteichthyes are the bony fish. They're the most abundant vertebrates on Earth. They've got an endoskeleton made of the same stuff yours is, calcium carbonate. They also have that lateral line system. But an advantage they have over most sharks is this thing called an operculum. It moves, it flaps. What's a problem a lot of sharks have? They can't stop moving. Because if they do, the water stops flowing over their gills and they can't breathe. So they have to move all the time. Bony fish, that's not the case because this little operculum acts like a flap. And it fans the water over the gills, even when the fish is not really moving. The bony fish have this swim bladder that helps them to float without having to swim. It saves them some energy. They have external fertilization and are oviparous. So what did we say this word oviparous means? They lay eggs outside the body. Once they lay those eggs, the male swims over the eggs and basically dive bombs them with sperm. And that's how fertilization happens. Outside the body. Would that approach work on land?
No.
No. The gametes would dry up. It wouldn't work. All right, the fish typically are also ectothermic. They think now that great white sharks may be an exception to that rule. But most fish are cold-blooded, ectothermic. Again, the external fertilization. Again, almost all fish, as far as we know, are oviparous, with a few sharks being ovoviviparous. That's another word we mentioned last time. That means what? They have eggs, but they keep the eggs where? In the body. They hatch in the body. And then when the babies come out come the babies and out come the pieces of the eggs. That's probably advantageous because the eggs are protected inside the mother's body. Most fish have a two-chambered heart. All fish, as far as I know, have a two-chambered heart. Here's our lateral line. You can see that right here. Again, what does that lateral line help them do? Here. You got a swim bladder, which helps them to float without having to actually put forth a lot of energy. You can see their gills, and that would be covered by a flap, usually kind of a circular flap here. What's that circular flap called? The operculum, and that helps them to be able to breathe without moving. All right, here's a lobe-finned fish. Supposedly, this kind of fish was the direct ancestor of what? Amphibians. And what they think happened is that there was a mutation in those main kinds of structural genes in your body, the Hox genes, that caused these bones down here to rearrange themselves just a little bit and form limb-like structures, legs. Something I mentioned a second ago, if we went back to that last phylogenetic tree, here in front of the bony fish, what was the big adaptation that was listed right there in front of the bony fish on that last tree? Lungs. There are a few kinds of bony fish that have lungs. Some will have both. But those fish typically will live in the water, usually like streams that dry up at certain times of the year. And when the stream dries up, what do the fish do? They dig a hole in the mud, breathe air until it rains again. Usually they just wait it out. They wait on the rain. But those kind of fish are thought to be the direct ancestors of amphibians. The big advancement of amphibians, development of limbs, legs. If you go to live on land, it's pretty important to have some limbs, right? Unless you're a snake. So, I don't know why that slide's there. We already looked at that. Need to work on that. Amphibians, in general. Amphibians live on land, but they're really not very good at it. What does amphi mean? Both. Both worlds. They live in both worlds. They're not very good at living on the land for a couple reasons. One, they're ectothermic. Is that the best way to be if you're going to live on land? Nope, because you're completely at the mercy of what? Temperature of your environment. They do have limbs, which help them out a lot. Their lungs are not very good. Most amphibians have to supplement their lung breathing by also breathing through what? Their skin. Which means their skin has to be what? Moist and thin. Which means if they come away from the water, what happens to them? If their skin is moist and thin, they dry out and they die. So they have to stay near water. They're locked to water. One reason they're locked to water is because of their breathing. They have a three-chambered heart, which means when blood comes back from their lungs and it comes back from their body into those top two chambers, what happens when they both go empty into the bottom chamber? You've got oxygenated blood in one chamber and deoxygenated in the other, and they both drop down into the same bottom chamber. What happens? It's mixed. And then what does their heart pump out to their body? Mixed blood, which means it's low in what? Low in oxygen, which means they can't have a whole lot of what? Low oxygen means low ATP, low cell respiration, right? So So that's another thing that sort of limits them on land, is this three-chambered heart, which is pumping around blood that's a mixture of oxygenated and deoxygenated. We said before, their skin has to be moist. They have to reproduce in the water for several reasons. One, what kind of fertilization do they have? External. They don't have male reproductive parts the way we do. The male gets on the back of the female, pushes on her sides with his little hands, pushes the eggs out, and basically he just bombs them with sperm on the way out, right? It's outside. If that happened on land, what would happen real fast? Everything would dry up. Also, their larvae, the tadpoles, have to live in the water for a while, right? So they're even though they live a little bit on land, they're tied to the water. They're oviparous, egg layers. But their eggs look like what? They're jelly-like. Can an amphibian egg make it on land? Nope, just dry out. So they're very tied to the water. There's some amphibians. You got your salamanders, frogs, these little legless amphibians called caecilians, toads, newts. I don't understand why someone would name their child newt like Newt Gingrich. I don't really understand that name. This is showing you the problem with the heart. Fish have a two-chambered heart, and that works for them because the oxygenated and the deoxygenated bloods don't mix. Amphibians with the three-chambered heart have the two upper chambers, which are called atria, and the lower chamber called the ventricles. And when these empty into the bottom chamber, it gets mixed, and that's why it looks what color up here? Purple. It's mixed. Us, the mammals and the birds, have a four-chambered heart. And it's basically like our heart is two different hearts in one. One side, this side, the red side is pumping around what? Oxygenated blood. And the right side in your heart is pumping around what? Deoxygenated. It's like we got two separate hearts, which means that when the left side pumps that blood to our body, what do we get? When that left side of the heart pumps that bright red blood to your body, what do you get? You get a lot of oxygen, which means you can make a whole lot of what? ATP. So that's a good thing. All right, so let's talk about reptiles today. Their big advancement is an amnion. And most of the time, we're going to call that an amniotic egg. That's an egg with what? What's a reptile egg like? Hard shell. A hard shell that's what? Waterproof. That means it can be laying where? On land. That's a big deal. All right, these reptiles are still, though, they're still not perfect for land. They're still cold-blooded, ectothermic. Well, what's the advantage of being ectothermic? What do you not have to do as often if you're ectothermic? You don't have to eat as much because you're not wasting energy doing what? Making heat. Okay, so that's an advantage. Reptiles, snakes don't have to eat very often, right? But they are at the mercy of outside temperature. They have internal fertilization, just like we do. They have the same parts we have reproductively. That's a good thing, because we don't have to worry about the sperm doing what? Dry it out. They never are outside the body, they're inside the body. Their eggs are amniotic, and I'm going to talk more about that in a minute, but for right now, realize that means they're hard shell, they're waterproof, they can develop on land without a water supply. They have a built-in water supply. They still have a three-chambered heart, but down near the bottom, it's almost like it's divided into four. There's like the beginnings of a wall to divide that bottom chamber into. So their heart's better than an amphibian's, but not quite as good as a reptile, as a bird or a mammal. They have that thick, scaly, water-resistant skin, which must mean what about their lungs? They work pretty good because they're not breathing out. They're not breathing through the skin. Their lungs are well developed. They breathe well with their lungs. They are oviparous for the most part, meaning they're egg layers. Although there's a couple of snakes that are ovoviviparous. Meaning that, again, that they have eggs, but they keep them where? Inside the mother's body until they hatch. Anybody know the snake around here that's famous for doing that? The snake in this part of Alabama that is ovoviviparous. It's called a garter snake. You guys seen a garter snake before? Garter snakes are ovoviviparous. There's some reptiles, obviously our turtles, different kinds of lizards like the Gila monster, alligators, snakes. There's an alligator or a crocodile. This is showing you the amniotic egg. And that amniotic egg has a built-in water supply. It's also got a built-in what? You got water, you're also going to need what? Food. What do we call the built-in food supply? Yolk. That's what yolk is, right? The yolk sacs, the food to feed that baby until it's ready to hatch. Also, most eggs have the white part of the egg. What's the name for the white part of the egg? When you cook an egg, the white part, what's that called? It's called the albumin. That's up there. The albumin. That's a protein that acts as another food source for the baby. The yolk runs out, the albumin is a backup food source. I've got another slide about eggs that I'll get to later on. I'll just mention this and then I'll go put him on the bus and be back in a second. The class of birds is aves. Aves, all birds are in that same class. And I'll take the time out there. You can go ahead and write down what's on this slide. And I will be back momentarily. All right, so back to the birds. Birds have some big advantages for living on land. They're endothermic, which means what? Warm-blooded. They make their own body temperature. They control their own body temperature. The advantage of that is they can live where? Pretty much anywhere. The disadvantage is you gotta eat all the time. If you don't have food, you can't generate body heat, right? So you gotta have a constant supply of food. They, like us, have a 4-chambered heart, which is good. That means what? Two things don't mix. The oxygenated and the deoxygenated don't mix, which means their tissues get lots of what? Oxygen and therefore lots of ATP. If you're gonna fly, takes a lot of ATP, right? That's good. A good question. They have their bones are very lightweight, filled with air sacs. Because if you're gonna fly, you better be light, right? They actually have fewer organs than we have. For example, they only have one gonad, one reproductive organ. They've gotten rid of extra weight so they can fly. Obviously, they have wings. Their lungs are actually more well developed than ours, than mammals. And that makes sense, because if you're going to fly, you better have a lot of energy, right? To have a lot of energy, you got to have a lot of oxygen. They have the amniotic eggs, very similar to the reptile eggs. Hard shell, water supply inside, yolk and albumin inside. And birds are oviparous, egg layers. Here you can see a bird. Their organs are mostly like ours, with a couple of exceptions. They have this organ called the gizzard. Anybody ever eaten chicken gizzard before? It's kind of hard and tough. I don't think I would touch it, but a lot of people like it. It's chicken liver, chicken gizzard, two different things. Gizzard's tougher, okay? Gizzard is above their stomach. And what birds do very early in their life is they eat little pebbles of rocks. And those little pebbles of rocks get caught up in this gizzard and stay there. And when the food makes it to the gizzard grinds like your stomach grinds. What do the rocks do? They like teeth, because most birds don't have teeth, right? So little rocks that they have in their gizzard grind up their food just like your teeth do. You don't have a gizzard. They do. Yes? Which one says that? then that's wrong. If the outline says they're ovoviviparous, that's wrong. Birds lay eggs outside their body, right? Birds are oviparous. All right, we're not going to have time really to go into mammals, but we will mention a couple of quick things. Obviously, mammals have internal fertilization, which is very important for living on land. Don't have to worry about sperm and eggs drying out. We are not, well, almost all mammals are viviparous, which means what? Anytime you see viva, like in the French word, c'est la vie. What's vie? Life, okay? Babies are born alive. No egg needed, right? No hard-shelled egg. The babies develop in the mother and come out most of the time pretty well developed. There are a couple of egg-laying mammals, though. They're in a group called the monotremes. What are the only two egg-laying mammals that exist? The platypus and echidna, which is a little anteater. Tiny little anteater called the echidna. Other than that, all mammals are viviparous, give birth to live babies. And we'll talk next time about the difference between placental mammals, which are us, marsupials, which are the pouched mammals, like kangaroos and possums and koalas and such, things like that, and then the monotremes, the egg layers. All right, it's a good place to stop.
See you.